As you'll see, this is called fishbowl session. I have to confess, I've never done a fishbowl session before, and neither have our guests, and possibly none of you has ever done it before either. So it's a great little experiment. But I gather you're the fish in the wider sea, and we are the fish in the fishbowl. And so the idea is that I'm going to ask our panelists, and I'll introduce them very shortly, a question or two. They'll respond, but we really would like you to come up and participate in the conversation. So you'll be the fish jumping out of the sea into the fishbowl here. So what we want is that whenever you want, if you want to contribute to the conversation, because this is very much about the take-home messages as well, please come up, we've 2 seats, so we can take 2 at a time. And then you can make a contribution. You can either express your views succinctly, please, or you can maybe ask the panelists a question or comment on what they have been saying. And in order to keep it going, we don't want any 2 people to monopolize the chairs. We would like as many of you coming up as possible. When you want to come up, and there's 1 or 2 people here, just tap their shoulder. And the rules of the game are the person whose shoulder has been tapped has to exit the stage, and the new person takes over. Okay, so we'll give it a shot and see how we get on. Okay. Now, I'm going to introduce our panelists first, because the theme of this fishbowl session is how can we build better science for policy ecosystems in Europe? But it's also really to explore some of the take-home messages as well. So let me introduce our guests. Seated far over is Maria Chiara Carrozza, the president of the National Research Council in Italy, and she's the chair of the ESAF, the European Science Advisors Forum. Nicole Grobert, whom you've probably seen before from yesterday's plenary session. She's the chair of the Group of Chief Scientific Advisors. She's also professor of Nanomaterials at the Department of Materials at the University of Oxford. And finally, Markus J. Prutsch is the Principal Administrator for Culture and Education Policy at the European Parliament. He is also, and that's particularly relevant for today, a member of YASAS, the Young Academy's Science Advice Structure. So what I'm going to do now, and you're all very welcome, and thank you for participating in this experiment. I'm going to just throw a general question to all of you, and whoever wants to start coming up from now, please take your seats. And I will moderate interventions and all of that. Okay. General question, Markus, I'll start off with you. What can we do next, do you think, to build better science for policy ecosystems in Europe?
Well, actually, that was the topic of the entire conference, and clearly there's not like the one solution to resolve that issue. But maybe 2 ideas that I would put forward. I think what is important is actually trying to complement existing science advice structures that are mainly top-down, and I mean both in terms of how they were established, but also how they work, with a bottom-up element. I know this is like asking for a lot, but I think it's necessary, and that involves engaging scholars that are not yet involved in science advice, in at least getting a taste for science advice and not consider something that is on the sidelines of the academic business or even dirty business. But bottom up also in the sense, I think there are levels that are much less affected by science advice so far, meaning the local and the regional level, where I think in comparison to the national and European level, there is much less of know-how and established structures. So I think these are two ways forward. But given my background, maybe adding one additional aspect, I think it's also crucial to think a bit outside the box in the sense of, can science for policy work when we are living in an environment where there is an increasing mistrust vis-à-vis expert cultures, where young people don't even have the skills to distinguish right and wrong news, meaning, I think, digital skills, but also trust in evidence. So in other words, we have to start also with education. If we want someone to be able to listen to scientific evidence, people must be capable of doing that.
Let's pick up on the last point because it's something very interesting and it's been a recurring theme. Fake news, what's right, what's wrong, all of that. You're looking at it from a young person's perspective in particular. So am I right in saying you said young people, when they're going through stuff, they may not know what's right, what's wrong. Can you tell me a little bit more about that in terms of science and scientific information in particular?
Yeah, I mean, it clearly relates to scientific information, but it starts also with basic information. You know, in terms of social media, when you are remaining in your echo chambers. And you know, in the end, if you're in a group that believes the world is flat, you might start ending up believing that the world is flat, and you get the impression everyone thinks the same. So I think it's about people also being able to think out of the box, being able to listen to other opinions, but also engage with those opinions. And I think this in the end relates to all kinds of knowledge, but also in particularly scientific knowledge.
And young scholars today, the ones whom your organisation would particularly represent, do they view science differently? Do they think about science for policy differently than those who would be a generation or two or three older than them?
I wouldn't say that. I mean, I think we cannot end up with such a generalizing view on it, but what is certain is that the structure of science has changed, that we are getting more specialists in particular areas, mainly fewer scientists that cover broader aspects, have an holistic approach, and this has also effects on science advice. You know, when you're very good, but only in a very particular field. But I wouldn't necessarily say that young generations see it differently than the older generation. Maybe they see a bigger urgency to do something about like challenges like climate change, but I wouldn't see a fundamental difference.
Okay, Markus, thank you for those opening remarks. Let's jump to you, Nicole. Same question, really. What do you think can be done next to build better science for policy ecosystems in Europe? And by the way, I'm going to start picking people to come up on stage if I don't get volunteers very quickly, which will be a really scary concept. Nicole, okay.
Thank you very much, Karen. I can't possibly answer that question, to be honest, for this conference, but I can answer this question for myself and what am I going to do after this conference. And having stumbled into science advice for policy as a scientist at heart who gets great joy in being in the lab doing experiments, I have learned a tremendous amount these 2 days, more than I ever expected. And the greatest surprise was to see the breadth of fish that we see here, the big fish and the not so big fish, and those that will be big fish. And there's one example. Over lunch I had a brief conversation. Somebody came up to me and said, "How did you get into science advice?" And I'm looking at you at the back. Actually, she's smiling. It's a PhD student in neuroscience, isn't it? Also doing a placement at the JRC, and she's got the guts to do it both during her PhD, which is quite unusual. Now, my mission after this conference is to spread the word about my experience doing science advice for policy and raising awareness of the subject science advice for Alessandro. We have sitting him here. He researches it, how to do good science advice. And that was something I was blissfully unaware before. And the theory behind it, when we have discussions about, you know, you're a scientist, you're an expert in the field, there are different roles for scientists in the science advice process. And being a member of SAM, Science Advice Mechanism of Europe, embodies a number of these different scientists with the different roles. And I think that's the beauty of this mechanism. And if we can embrace all the entities that do science advice within the Commission and also external to the Commission and work together, I think that would make Europe quite strong. And we have got all the tools there. Just need to talk to each other.
Need to talk to another, okay. Maria Chiara, maybe you can give us your opening views on that, please. Oh, we have another volunteer, that's excellent. Okay.
Okay.
I'm going to stand here so I can see you.
I think that for better science for policy, we have first of all include the young generations of students and researchers into the process. And because things are changing so fast that we need more inclusion of young generations in our discussion. They can see the society, even the future in a different way. For example, generative AI or some other tools. We made some experiments in Italy, and we found that, for example, people of my age are more and more scared than people much younger than me. So it's the perception of what is good and what is wrong or what is a threat can be very much different across generations. So I think this is an important point. And second point is diversity. We need a diverse ecosystem for producing policy papers and opinions. So it's not something that can be related to a single association or forum. We need different perspective, different views, because science is growing and evolving thanks to different positions. So we have to establish a mechanism, but we have also to establish a mechanism to consult the society, to consult different stakeholders into the process. So the European Commission, in the process of science advisory mechanism, included the consultation of stakeholders. I think that we have to do that more and more in order to include citizens and to engage them into the process.
Okay, thank you very much. So our first fish out of the sea, tell us who you are and then what your point is.
Yes, I'm Alessandro Allegra from the European Commission. I'm one of the organizers, but I think I will be speaking my mind, my individual mind, rather than necessarily a corporate view. And actually, to some extent, it's a bit of a pushback on the last point that was made, because I think we had a very interesting and fascinating discussion over these few days. But then me and my colleagues will have to go home and do something about it. We talk about building the ecosystem. It's something we're doing together. But from our perspective, from the European Commission, we will have to go home and do something. And I'm thinking, how can we be ambitious, but at the same time realistic about what we're asking? What are we asking to science advice and science for policy? Because there's been a lot of discussion about values, about involving citizens, engagement, stakeholders, inclusiveness, all very important things. But what it is that we're trying to fix? Are we trying to improve policy making, or are we trying to fix what we perceive as being dysfunctional politics? Are we trying to fix the fact that we're not happy with the way democratic decision-making is happening these days? I mean, what Markus was saying about people being their echo chamber is not a problem of science specifically. It's a problem of politics, a problem of democracy. Talking to citizens and engaging stakeholders is crucial, but do we want science advice to do that, or do we need to rethink a little bit more broadly how do we take decisions collectively and the role that science plays in this? But can science and science advice really fix all of these problems? And I don't know, I think we need to be careful about this and try to identify where we can really act from our community without necessarily taking the burden on ourselves of solving all of humanity's problems all at once, at least.
This is my views. Okay, very good. Markus, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, by all means, because I would fully agree what you just said. And I think also this raising the dimension of realism, I think in yet another dimension, namely also to dare to say what are the problems we can't fix with science advice. Sometimes also there is a bit of this hubris in the sense of we can resolve all the problems that exist in the world, or saying, look, do we always have the evidence we need? Also to be able to say, look, we don't have it. There are limits to the evidence we can provide, but also limits to the problems we can resolve. And maybe the imminent problems of democracy might not necessarily be able to be resolved by scientific evidence.
Before I bring in Nicole and Maria Chiara, can you introduce yourself and make the point as well, or contribute to the conversation? It's on, so you don't have to press anything.
Hello everyone, I'm Solomia Vanagina from Lithuania, and I'm basically trying to, in Lithuania, to make this advisor mechanism like Mary mentioned. But also my question is okay, so we advisors, and we usually speak about the scientific advisors, it's a science. But my question is do we should be the scientists, or we should be just, I don't know, we mentioned beginners and etc. But maybe the person who is interested in a scientist and understand the scientist but doesn't do the science. From this point of view, how do you think?
Okay, very good. Nicole, Maria Chiara, if you could answer that and comment on the earlier points. If any of you want to jump in now and replace either Alessandro or our colleague from Lithuania, jump in, tap their shoulder. Okay, very good. Nicole, you're on. Yes, thank you.
I forgot what I was going to say. So, Alessandro mentioned the involvement of the general public in science advice, and it links a bit with your question. You said who should be giving this scientific advice, and I think it should be scientists who are trained scientists, but within an existing mechanism that removes scientific bias or personal bias from the evaluation of the scientific evidence. And that brings me to the values. The values, I think Europe has a unique set of values that are specific to Europe, and I think we should cherish it and use it in the scientific advice that we give, because competition is out there and we need to be competitive, but competition also tends to lead people into routines that may not be conform with the values that we have in Europe, if you understand what I'm trying to say. Pearl is giving me the looks.
Okay.
If I
Yes.
can add that, it's like contribution, it's like we have, like you speak about, we have fragments, because scientists is going deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. But problem is more complex.
But that's why you have different roles that scientists can play.
Yeah, but what I mentioned in the Lithuanian case, what I see when you need to elect the advisors is the question, what I make, okay, you have environment ministry, and you need to elect the advisor, who she should be like biologist or neuroscience and etc. But he is focusing in one field. But for example, climate, it's big problem. It's society, it's environment, etc. So how we can manage, like, of course, it's like the advisors, we spoke about the broker knowledge. So I think it should be not the science and policy, but by the mechanism. I think that it should be science, broker, and policy. It's like the translation, we have different language. This is, I think, the key.
Very good. Okay, thank you. Maria, Chiara, before we go to Pearl.
Yes, I would like to say two things. The society is and citizens are related to the politics, okay? We cannot divide, because politics and the parliaments are the expression of citizens. So it's important to increase and to improve the trust of citizens into science in order to improve the trust of the parliament into science. So it's important, this relation cannot be avoided with citizens, okay? We need the first part. And second, for what concerns advising, so the chief scientist cannot be an expert of everything. There are different roles, can call experts on the different issues that are being relevant for the main questions. So it's important to understand that it's not a single person, individual, playing all roles. Is that there are specific roles, and maybe training and continuous learning in advice is important in order to share the knowledge about this process and how it works.
Thank you very much. Pearl, is it? So if you can tell us who you are and what your comment, question.
Sure. Yes. Pearl Dijkstra. I'm a professor of sociology at the Erasmus University in Rotterdam. So my day-to-day business is training PhDs and postdocs and master's students. So I deal with the young generation a lot. But I've also been one of the chief scientific advisors to the European Commission. And at the time, I was the only social scientist, which was absolutely fascinating. And I learned there to translate, or at least to explicate, the importance of social science. But that's not what I wanted to say. I'm responding to, what does a science advisor do? No, we cannot fix politics. We cannot engage with citizens all the time. Nevertheless, I think we have to look at science itself and the fact that there are different kinds of knowledge. You can say knowledges if we're going into, the soft stuff, but there's the indigenous knowledge. There's also the practitioner's knowledge. There's shared knowledge that hasn't been written up, but if you have a group of top scientists, they'll all go, oh yeah, we agree. So we have to think about what are the knowledges that we're bringing. That's one. And no, we cannot do it as individuals. Yes, if I have a problem with a sewage system, then I'll bring in a sewage person. But a lot of the problems that Europe is dealing with are very complicated. They cross silos. And one of the skills that a science advisor needs is to be a top scientist, to be able to evaluate, that's garbage. As chief scientific advisors, we did that on the area of microplastics, for example. That was quite bad research, but it was very strongly driven by policymakers worrying about their constituencies. And then it's our responsibility to say, this is not good research. It could be improved in such and such and such a way. That's one. And another is that if you have experience as a researcher, you can also look at other fields and you can judge quality. So I would like to put excellence at the top and also diversity of knowledges. And of course we talk multi and interdisciplinary, but I also want to bring in the non-standard sources of knowledge.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Pearl. Markus, do you want to comment on that? And then we'll take
Maybe
the
just briefly, I think just to support what you said, Pearl, also, that I think it's important to start with, that to understand science in a broad sense of the meaning, that we are not limiting it to natural sciences, the hard sciences, because I think indeed social sciences and even humanities, I'm a historian, so I guess I can say that, have something to contribute. Secondly, I just wanted to follow up on what you said on chief scientific advisors, because indeed, and that follows up also on what you said, I think the role is indeed as facilitators, translators, but also like a critical element assessing the quality of the expertise that comes, but not necessarily representing the whole width of expertise you need, because that you could never cover considering the complexity of problems today. But I think still beyond these mechanisms that are very important, we also need to find a way, and this is the more tricky part, you know, how we, what I call the bottom-up approach. How do we enter like the nitty-gritty of the black boxes of parliamentary committees where a lot of lawmaking is taking place and where there is no science advice mechanism in place, that still scientific evidence makes its way into that. And I think we have to work more on that as well, but it's a tough one. And both those points actually, or two of the points you mentioned, we discussed yesterday, the wider sciences, the arts and humanities, and we had a whole session about parliamentary policy, science for policy making, which was very interesting. Can we take your contribution, please, and tell us who you are?
I'm Rudy. I'm the coordinator of SAPEA, but I'm here on my own capacity because I clapped you
Hold the mic
you posed a
closer,
question which urges me to oppose a bit on what you said. Because one can answer it exactly in a way you all did, from the perspective of, for example, the scientific advice mechanism of the European Commission, where we say, we include only scientists. We do it as SAPEA, you would do it as chief scientific advisors. But there are other models out there in the world who come to different conclusions because they have a different mandate. So the question is not if there's the one real thing, the question is about the mandate. And I just want to introduce very briefly one other mandate, which are the Academies of Technical Sciences, which are a combination of science and business, given or reflecting also the fact that 2/3, for example, in Germany, of all science is in business and not elsewhere in universities or something like that. And if you have an Academy of Technical Science, which combines science and business, you have a different outcome and a different mandate. For example, my academy, the Academy of Technical Science in Germany, ACATech, has invented the concept of Industry 4.0, which is across the world and around the world. Chief scientific advisors would never be able to invent something like that because business is not with them, so to say. But if you have a different mandate and a different organizational structure, something different comes out. And this is, for example, also why Italy now decided to make a new Academy of Technical Science, because this is missing in your country. And now we have some. We worked, by the way, for 12 years about that issue. And it's important to have this variety. And science can also be an enabler to get, so to say, the knowledge out of industries through scientific processes into society and into policy. It's just a different mandate and a different issue.
Okay, Maria.
I can comment. So I totally agree. So this is the reason why I said we need a diverse ecosystem with diverse mandate and diverse functions, that scientific advice cannot be compressed into a single area. So the Academy for Engineering and Technical Sciences are intended exactly for mixing also the view of business and industrial leadership. And I think if we think at our values, we have in the European programs, we have scientific excellence, industrial leadership, and societal needs. So we have to think to all three pillars of our values, and then we have to include more and more the other two, not only scientific excellence, but also the evolution in industrial leadership and also societal needs.
Okay, Nicole?
Well, it's just to echo and to say that one thing doesn't fit all answers or requirements. You need to look at what the policymaker needs. And if it's industry input, it needs to be industry input. And if it's scientific evidence, it needs the scientist behind it to explain what's out there and what the consequences are if you go for one or the other option.
Okay, very good. Now, we have a new contributor here.
My name is Rupert Lewis, I'm Chief Science Policy Officer from the UK Royal Society. It's nice to be back in Brussels, I should say. It's been a long time since I've had good food. In my previous role, I was the Director of Government Office for Science, responsible for growing the Chief Scientist Network in the UK government and trying to create demand. In this room, we have a huge bottom-up enthusiasm for giving science advice, but I sense a sense of frustration. How do we get the policymakers to listen to us? And Nicole yesterday was talking about the SAM mechanism for 5 years has struggled to get traction. I wonder if the Commission could do more to work on the demand environment. For example, if you're the Cabinet Secretary in the UK government, you want to look good in front of the Cabinet Secretary in France and Germany and Italy and so on. So when you have a meeting of these people here in Brussels, why doesn't the Commission ask them, tell us your latest science advice innovation, create a sense of competition amongst them. Marek earlier gave a great talk on an AI-driven science advice in the Czech Republic. Get the British Cabinet Secretary to go home and say, I want one of those. So I wonder if there's more the Commission could do to create more demand amongst the senior policymakers who are not really in the room today.
Okay, I don't know if there's anybody in the Commission who yes, are you a Commission official? Great, okay. Come on up, you can...
That's a different sort of meeting when you stand up and say,
No, you can sit down. Yes.
My name is David and I'm a Commission official. Great question. Some of us are leaving this meeting, flying off to Dublin tonight, where our colleagues in DG Reform are organising the regular meeting of the expert group of senior civil servants in the member states responsible for thinking again about the future of public administration. And the whole day and a half is about how we can integrate science into government and public administration. So that conversation is happening. That was why Minister Havdra was here today. He's also going to be there in Dublin as well. So this is definitely on the cards, and we're working closely with our colleagues in DG Reform to address the demand side. We've got training courses and other things that you can find out about. But that meeting of the senior civil servants in the member states to discuss how we bring more science into government, that's actually happening tomorrow and the day after in Dublin.
Can I just ask you, David, are most member states willing to engage with this? Do you get a sense that, the 27 countries, all of them believe this is right and this is the right way to go?
Yes, I mean, different degrees, but on the whole, a very strong yes. But don't take my word for it. So if you go and look online, there was a discussion of the Commission's staff working document in the Research Council last December, and it was an open discussion, so it's all been videoed. And this was the first time I've ever been in a council discussion where every single member state wanted to take the floor and say something. And then watch this space. Our great friends in the Spanish presidency are doing a fantastic job of working towards council conclusions in the December council. And watch this space and see what they say. But of course, council conclusions adopted by all member states. So I think on the side of national government, it's full speed ahead.
Brilliant. Okay, David, thank you. Do you want to take over David's position there? And then I'm going to ask for your contribution. So if you go next now, thank you.
Mary Georgievska, I'm also for Erasmus University in Rotterdam. I'm probably one of the few non-scientists here. But I do work as a knowledge broker. I try to be the bridge between the scientists and the policymakers. the question I have is in relation to the bottom-up issue that you brought. What is the incentive system? It's not about mechanisms, but it's about the incentives, because I constantly struggle convincing my researchers or scientists to bring the brilliant knowledge that they produce to Brussels, to connect to the policymakers. So, and you constantly faced with questions, yeah, I have to teach, I have to do the research, I have to publish. What is the incentive system for the researchers, especially young ones, we discussed it before, to be more active in policymaking and feeding into evidence-based policymaking? That's my...
Okay, because they don't feel incentivized, do they? Or they feel they need an incentive?
They might feel incentivized in a way that they would love to do it, but there are thousands of obstacles in the system that don't allow them or that limit their abilities. Pearl and experts like Pearl are handful in our university which are really willing, they are at a point of their career where they can afford it. But young scientists, for example, which do also brilliant work, have the career, the pressure of 10 years and career development is limiting their willingness to also feed into the policy-making processes.
Okay, let's
just an example, now recently was the call for experts group on societal economic impact on research and innovation. Out of, I don't know how many scientists approached, I managed to convince one to apply for it. And it's all about incentives, as I said. So if there are experiences of people that can enlighten me, how can I sell the story to my researchers, I'm more than happy.
Okay, let's get a quick snapshot of advice, then we're going to go to you, and then I think we have two final people. You can come up now and take the seat. Thank you very much.
I want only to say that it's important to reward this in the career, and so we spoke about narrative curricula, including this part of the work and claiming that this is a sort of service that scientists are doing. So if we implement this idea of serving in being advisor, and that this is part of the job of a researcher. So we have to change our way of rewarding this in the career. And also we have to speak more and more, and conferences like this are useful in order to make it possible that people and researchers understand that this is part of our work, okay? So like making peer review of papers, or like being part of scientific society, being part of this board is fundamental for growing. I think I learned a lot by being part of this board. So it's not only to give something, it's always to also to learn from the others, advisors.
Okay, Nicole?
I think the answer is maybe a little bit more complex than that. From a scientist point of view, one thing is the career, getting tenure, permanent, and when you're permanent, you still need to apply for grants to get your research funds, and you're competing with people who spend 100% or 200% of their time pushing the papers out and are active in the research community. So the days that I spend here today, I can't spend in the scientific conference where my peers are arguing about scientific content. So I'm maybe perceived as a scientist who doesn't do her job as deeply or as properly as they do, who spend 200% of the time doing that and not engaging elsewhere. I don't think the answer is straightforward. I think it needs people who have the guts, like this young lady in the back who does her PhD in hard sciences, but also policy. And you will not capture every single scientist, but hopefully, if there's a reward system that allows young scientists to do both and still get a career in the sciences, there may be a handful more that make him come forward. And one thing is also the metrics, the evaluation of research output by numbers and not necessarily by quality. It's a huge issue, and until we tackle that, it'll be tough.
Okay, Markus?
Yeah, I would also say that creating incentives is very difficult. task after all. But one key aspect is certainly to make clear that doing science advice is something that fits into an academic career, that you get appreciation and reward for it. But I think also on the policy side, there are things that can be done. I'm just mentioning a very small example. So in the European Parliament, we have started a pilot project to accompany legislative work at committee level. We call it concomitant expertise, meaning rather than asking for big studies, which are usually in the hands of rather big consortia, where also individual researchers have always the feeling, well, what's the added value of my contribution? The idea there is to involve individual researchers throughout a legislative procedure, meaning you have as a rapporteur and a committee a group of scientists that can help you from the beginning to the end of the procedure, but also to give the individual researcher the feeling, you know, I'm really talking to the policymakers. They might not take everything on board, but to establish, you know, this proximity that, and the element of trust that is, I think, in the end also key to feel rewarded.
Okay, we only have about 8 minutes left. So what I'm going to do is ask both of you, one after the other, to make your contribution, and if you could keep it short, that would be great. Thank you very much.
Hello everybody, my name is Elias Koch, I'm a policy analyst at the Joint Research Center. In fact, I'm part of David's team, and I'm still sort of new to this entire ecosystem. So my question is not how can we build it better, the science and policy ecosystem, but what have we already achieved? I understand that this is not a very old community yet, so maybe there's not a lot of history to look back on, but where are we? Have we plucked the low-hanging fruits already? Is it getting more difficult, or are we still plucking low-hanging fruits? Sort of progress bar, where are we, 20%, 50%? How close?
Progress in terms of building the science for policy ecosystems.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Okay, thank you very much for that. We'll take your question, and I think you want, so we'll take you as the last. Fish jumping from the sea into the bowl. Thank you very much. Thank you, and we'll take your comment, yeah?
Okay, so my name is Chiara Menoni. I am a seconded national expert within the scientific advice mechanism of the European Commission. And I had two short points. The first is we have spoken a lot about brokerage, but what about a very not nice word like pracademics, people that have an experience in both fields. And if this is something that can be useful, we need to create perhaps the possibility for people that are practitioners to be also professors at universities and vice versa. And this goes a little bit into what Nicole was saying. And the second point is that by being an urban planner, which is intrinsically an interdisciplinary activity, my question is how can we value and define the good criteria to evaluate the quality of interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary research, which is different than disciplinary one? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll take your comment as well, and then we'll get wrap-up comments from our panelists. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jaap Verhaas. I'm working for the European Commission in the unit responsible for giving the secretary to the group of scientific advisors and involved in several processes, such as in being the bridge between, together with the JRC, being the bridge between ESAF and the European Commission. ESAF meaning the European Science Advisors Forum, of which Mrs. Carrozza is the chair. My issue is about the effect. It's a proverb that says a good tool is half the work. So what is the tool of science advice at the core? I think it is the question. Science advice is addressing a question. And that is, I have been with the science advice mechanism since 2015. And so I saw it coming. And what was relatively simple, says no, where it's not so difficult, asking the right question to these science advisors. And now it became an elaborate process that involves SAPEA and many other people, and whilst keeping at one hand the independence of the science advisors, and on the other hand getting the policymakers involved in formulating the question. And that is then, and so we have the scoping paper phase that is online, you can see it. So my question is, we have done this at European level, but can we replicate that at national level? Maybe you have a different vision there, but in my view, for any science advice process, wherever, you should have a mechanism to formulate the right question. The Danish colleague has spoken about the evaluation framework that they have developed also for DGJRC. And this also needs to have a proper formulated question in order to have the evaluation addressing a question.
Okay.
So there's my request to reflect on how to improve the tool to make the work of science advice better.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. We've only a few minutes now for each one of our panelists. You can stay where you are to I suppose, give your overall views on the points being made. Markus, we'll start off with you.
Okay, yeah, I was afraid of that. So, because actually, I mean, I'm not so familiar with SAM and how, I mean, that's why I thought, relating to your last question, maybe others are in a better position, well, you know, how to improve the tool. But I think, indeed, already having a tool is indeed something. And my impression, at least, is even at national level, in some member states and also beyond Europe, you have established mechanisms that are working sufficiently well. I guess it always depends whether you consider the glass half full or half empty. But considering that in many countries there is nothing of scientific, science-informed policy making, I think we should rather be proud of what has already been achieved, but not, you know, tire of trying to improve it further. Maybe that's how I would finish.
And on the other 2 points that were made, you know, the point about what's been done so far, isn't it? And then the point that you made as well. Anything to add to that?
Not really. I mean, I would also say, indeed, a lot has already been done, and I see, especially at the European level. And I think one should also not get, you know, like kind of discouraged by people saying like the SAM is just like a fig leaf. So to give the impression we are making politics now differently than before, because there are such voices too. But really seeing what's the added value. It's working. It produces important outcomes. So in other words, I think indeed a lot has been done, but maybe even more needs to be done, including, and I want to mention, to keep the head of YASAS here too, involving more also young and early and mid-career researchers in the process. They might not have yet the seniority, it's the element of trust that is often linked to seniority, but I think without young voices, the whole picture will remain incomplete.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Markus. Nicole, final take.
I don't have really very much to add other than to invite people, if anyone wants to speak more about how science advice mechanism, how it works, and get some insights, I'm happy to talk.
Okay, thank you. Maria, Chiara, final word to you.
Yes, first of all, I think that we are discussing about science advice and the diversity of the ecosystem, and I think this is an achievement that we are discussing in a European conference with European commissions, with many officers and also scientists and members of the different academies. So this is, I think, is a progress, okay? And because democracy is based on discussing and sharing ideas. And so I think this is an achievement. And then we learn something, and then we go home and we try to implement and improve our system because we learned something in this conference, I think. And second, I also, for example, I learned more about the inclusion of young scientists into the process, and this is something that I learned here. So it's a different perspective that I can introduce. So it's important to sharing ideas and to compare systems. I am not sure that we we are able to find the perfect system. We have more consolidated systems. We have new systems in Europe, and there are many, many differences. But I think the values are doing something for the society, serving as an advisor, trying to reward this, and also to be independent and autonomous from politics. This is a point. The freedom of research is something which is our value, and we have to defend it.
Okay, on that really good point, thank you so much to our panelists, to our wonderful fish who came out of the sea into the fishbowl. Thank you so much to all of you.